I know who you are. We know who you are. We've been following you this whole time. So, thankfully, my Russian-speaking friend was there next to me and said, no, we're just visiting. Welcome back to Tom's Big Adventure Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about the time that Russia thought I was a spy when I entered the country on my big hitchhiking trip. And I was warned about this beforehand by a Royal Marine who'd picked me up on the way to Russia, that they'd be watching me the whole time and they would think I was a spy. So they did, and quite a story. It takes place over several months, various different points that I believe that I was being watched or followed or questioned by the FSB. So we'll get onto that in due course. But firstly, I'd just like to try something new. I'd like to try sharing some life updates. Just to, it's always a good idea to try new things, see what works. So firstly, I've got a CIC called the Greenwoods Foundation. I run that with my wife Emma and our neighbour Becky, to get people outside, particularly those who need it most, those struggling with isolation and poor mental health, the ones who may be from deprived backgrounds as well, who can't necessarily afford outdoor activities. We've just got funding, about £20,000 from the National Lottery, so it's a real thing now. It only started about 5 months ago in, I believe, September last year, and we've just been working voluntarily for that time, and now we can get paid to do it. Now we can run it as more of a almost a full-time thing. So that's very, very exciting. That's going to hopefully grow over the coming months and years. It just means that my own experiences of adventure can now be used to, help other people in the way that adventure can. As for the podcast, it's been about a month and a half now of running it, and it's been quite an experience. It's been really, really good to talk about these stories and to know that people actually want to hear about the stories. Because for quite a while I didn't think that people did. I don't really like talking about myself, even when I've got something interesting to talk about. I'll be in a room of people and someone will put me on the spot with something, and I tend to just deflect it. I tend to just get other people to talk about themselves, because I think it is the polite thing to do, but also sometimes people do want to listen to me speak, so it's been good for that. And the more I've done it, the more people have asked me in my private life to tell them stories, to expand on stuff, and that's been really helpful as well. So if you have any feedback like that, do let me know, because I need to know how much to share, how much not to share. And it's interesting because I wasn't really comfortable talking about this trip beforehand, because I know it's a really, really big, impressive thing that I've done, and I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want to sound like I was bragging or anything like that, and I didn't want to put people down, because not many people have done something of that magnitude, and not because they didn't want to. Some people just haven't been able to. So yeah, it's been good to sort of calibrate how much I share, how much I don't share. So yeah, definitely going to carry on for the foreseeable future. And as for you lovely people watching and listening, it's been really, really helpful to see that people actually want to listen and engage with what I'm saying. So it's done better than I thought it would. It's on YouTube alone, there's something like 300 views in total. And on the podcast app, it's something like, it's almost at 100, I think, maybe 80s. And it's just done better than I thought it would. And there's consistently people every week tuning in. So that's the most important thing. If you're tuning in every week and listening, then thank you. It really means a lot. So without further ado, I'll tell you the story. Reason for telling this story today. I was at one of my jobs the other day, and like I said just before, more and more people have started asking me to tell stories. And there was one guy, he said to me, give me the best stories, like the highlights of your trip. And I couldn't answer the question because, there's so many, but also, how do you pick 1, 2, 3 stories out of several thousand? And there are some stories that are better than others. Obviously, that's the same with anyone's life. But how do you pick? So all I did was I just said the first thing that came into my head, which was the story of being mistaken for a British spy in Russia. Now, if I'd have known that that was happening at the time, it would have been quite a scary situation. But all I thought was, this, it was just really strange what was going on. So before entering Russia, as I was approaching Russia, several people picked me up. One of them was a Royal Marine in the UK, and he asked for some information about the route. He just wanted to, I suppose, make sure I knew what I was doing. He took some responsibility for that. He asked me about the route. I told him about Russia, and he just warned me. He said, you're going to be on their radar the whole time, right from the time you're about to approach the border in Estonia. And I thought, that's okay. Like, how's that possible? But also, why do you need to tell me that? And also, what makes you say that? And he said, well, you're a British citizen who's not entering in the normal way. You're not flying into Moscow or one of the major airports. You are crossing over land with a backpack on your own, which is suspicious, but also you look like a spy. And I thought, what does that mean? And he said, well, you've got a big curly mustache and long hair, and you just have this look about you, like you look like a spy. And I thought, I kind of knew what he meant. As I went through school, other kids said to me, are you going to become a secret agent when you're older or something like that? And yeah, my whole life, especially now, people always think I'm undercover in some way. I've worked previously, left it last year, I worked a mental health job, and I had my notebook with me just to write down thoughts for future podcast episodes, but also book ideas. And they thought that I was with Panorama. I was undercover writing notes on them when I wasn't at all. So I must have the look, apparently. Anyway, he was right, exactly right. As soon as I entered Russia, there were so many cars around. All of them were scratched, dented, or just really old. But there was one car, the first car that picked me up. As soon as I'd crossed into Russia, it picked me up, and it was brand new, shiny, bright white. The seat belts hadn't even been used yet. They had these special covers on them, which was really odd. Never seen that before. And this man pulled in the car. He said, where are you going? I said, St. Petersburg. It was a couple of hours away. And he said, cool, I'll take you. In Russian, obviously. And that was that. And I got in, and I thought, there's something really off about this guy. Something doesn't feel right. I didn't know what it was. Something doesn't feel right. So we carried on, drove out of that first town, and he started asking me questions I'd never been asked before in someone's car. Normally in someone's car, you could ask questions like, do you have any brothers or sisters? Where are you from? Where are you staying tonight? Things, basic, small talk when you get to know someone, those kinds of things. But this man, he was quite short. He looked like he'd served in the military in some way. Ginger hair, quite short hair, and sort of smart casual clothes. And he was just asking me, what's in your bag? Who are you meeting in Russia? Why are you in Russia? There was one. This was all through a translation app. He was talking into his phone and showing it to me. And there was one thing he asked me. At the time, I read it as, do you know M16, like the gun M16? But what he really asked, I think, was, do you know MI6, the International Security Services in the UK? So he was asking me, are you a spy? And all these questions he was asking me, there was a look he was giving me, and I've never had this look before in my life, and I've only had it once since this time, and I'll come on to that in a minute. He was looking at me, but right into me, beyond my eyes, almost into my soul. He was observing me, everything I was saying, all the responses I was giving. He was reading me beyond the words and beyond the tone. He was looking right at me. And as he was doing that, I could see beyond him as well. I could see he was just trying to work me out. And I didn't feel like I was convincing him that I was just innocent. I didn't feel like I could. It was almost like if there was any hint of deception in what I was saying, he'd find out, he'd know. So all these questions he was asking me, I just kept saying, like, I don't know, or it's just camping equipment in my bag. Stuff like that. And all the while he was doing this, all the while he was talking, he had his hand out the window. And it was as if he was giving hand signals to one of the vehicles behind us. There was only one car behind us, as I remember, quite far in the distance. So I'm pretty sure that was something else to do with Russian spies. But yeah, anyway, all I could resolve to say was that I'm just a hippie. I thought that word's going to translate. Just a hippie. Kept saying that. Nothing to worry about. Kept reassuring him. Just a hippie. And still didn't seem convinced, but he dropped me off in St. Petersburg and I guess turned around and went back. But anyway, arrived in St. Petersburg and went to meet my host from Couchsurfing, but it was about 4 hours away. I always allowed plenty of time to arrive somewhere before meeting a host because I thought hitchhiking's so unpredictable. I'm not going to be able to arrive there at an exact point. I have to allow time. So went and found I believe it was a McDonald's cafe. Went and sat in there, got myself a milkshake, and just waited in the upstairs bit. So it became dark outside. Nighttime came in, and around the time I walked in there and ordered and sat down and started drinking, an old man, able-bodied old man in semi-casual gear, walked into the other side of the McDonald's and sat at the other side of the room to me. And he was looking in my general direction the whole time. Never ordered anything, but he was looking in my general direction. And I kept trying to make eye contact, but he wouldn't give it to me. He was just looking. And that was it. And I was in there about 4 hours. After about 3 hours, I made eye contact with him finally. At that point, he got up and walked out. And then walked in again and sat behind me on that side. So I believe that he was observing me in some way. So that was that. Anyway, that was it for a few weeks, I believe. You know, there could have been other stuff going on that I didn't notice. There was the odd vehicle parked on a street that looked really out of place with someone in it who thought they couldn't be seen. But the really, really terrifying part of this story came several weeks later when, after getting residency, after moving to Georgia, the country, making friends, finding a job as a journalist, I decided to go to somewhere called Abkhazia. Now, Abkhazia is, if you ask Russia, it is an independent country that was taken from Georgia. If you ask Georgians and most of the world, they'll say it's part of Georgia, but it's Russian occupied. It's a tiny slither in the top left corner of Georgia. I'll put a little map up in this video if you're able to see it, if you're watching. We went into Abkhazia. It was me, my other journalist friend, and his friend who was a Russian speaker. She was Lithuanian, and it was really, really good to have her there because she could just translate the whole time. We passed into their border control and got many, many questions. What are you doing in Abkhazia? All this sort of stuff. But I think that was pretty standard. I don't think that's cool because they thought I was a spy. But went into Abkhazia. First night was fine. Everyone was going on about how great a country it is. All that sort of stuff. The next day we went to a Orthodox church. We were just sort of walking around. We were taking in the culture, I suppose, trying to build up a story. And anyway, this priest walked out. He was very tall. He looked about 7 foot, but he was probably about 6 foot. He was just massive, very big, very authoritative, very powerful presence. And he came over to us and he shook my friend's hand. He shook his friend's. He shook my friend's hand. Shook the girl's hand, and it all seemed very relaxed, very sort of friendly. But I had this weird feeling again, like something wasn't quite right. And he came up to me and he said, well, no, he didn't say anything. He shook my hand, but he grabbed it. He gripped it and pulled me in, and he said, "Are you a journalist, or are you just a hippie?" And he looked into me in the same way again, right into me. And he used that exact same word, hippie. And the way he used that word and the way he looked at me was as if to say, we know who you are, we've seen you before, we're following you. So back off, sort of thing. Because the situation with Abkhazia is very delicate. Russia's adamant that it's its own country. They don't want any interference with that, and I suppose maybe they saw me as someone who was going to do that, because I did go back and I wrote a whole story on it for the Georgian newspaper, a 2-part story on, well, exactly what it was like, exactly what I saw. It was just a piece of journalism, just saying what I could see, really. So that was absolutely terrifying. This huge priest shaking my hand and basically saying, I know who you are, we know who you are, we've been following you this whole time. Because I didn't know what was going to come next. So thankfully my Russian-speaking friend was there next to me and said, no, we're just visiting, don't worry about us. But it seemed that all he really wanted to do was just scare me a little bit, which he did. He definitely terrified me. I absolutely froze. So, and that was it. The rest of the time I was in Russia was, I think they sort of worked out early on that I wasn't actually a spy, which is really quite good, worked in my favour. I believe they stopped following me about halfway in. I was only there for a month, passed through into Kazakhstan, and that's a whole different story, Kazakhstan. I do believe that there were people in Kazakhstan following and watching as well, and all the Stan countries actually. They're all Russian-speaking, they're all former Soviet countries, so I do believe that there was Secret Service presence in those countries. One particular story comes to mind about that was the time in Uzbekistan. I was in Tashkent, the capital city, and I was just walking out of the town. I was trying to leave, and that day the Kazakhstani president was visiting for some sort of talk with the Uzbek president. And every couple of blocks, every few hundred meters, I'd get someone come up to me who looked, for lack of a better way of saying it, homeless. They were dirty, they weren't washed, they had dirty clothes on, but they come up to me and say, I need to see your ID. And the first one that came up to me, I thought, go away, what are you on about? Like, I thought they were asking for money or something. But then very quickly afterwards, a very well-polished man in a suit would come up behind him and say, no, you're showing him your ID now. As if to say, you're going to get arrested if you don't show us your ID. So showed him the ID, showed him inside the bag. They obviously thought I was assassinating the president or something, but I wasn't. I was just a hippie, just walking out. So, and that happened every so often. Anyway, made it out of Tashkent, all across Uzbekistan and into Georgia, and gained residency there. And I'm sure this will be the topic of a future episode, but the reason I wanted to gain residency was to apply for a Chinese visa. Now, China's spy situation was something completely different. They were a lot less secretive about trying to find out who I was and what I was doing. They were a lot more direct. They'd just grab me off the streets. And I touched on that in the very first episode, but it does deserve its whole own episode another time. But for today, I think I'll end it there. Thanks again for tuning in. And if you liked it, if you like this episode, please leave a review. It's a bit of effort, but it really, really does help. It just shows people that other people listen to it. If you don't mind as well, if you could subscribe and maybe follow on the podcast app, that would be unimaginably helpful. So thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you next week.